Welcome to today's meeting of the Corporate Governance Committee, which is taking place at County Hall in Glenfield, though some of the others will be joining on Microsoft Teams. I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live via the County Council website and will also be available for viewing after the meeting. Very timely reminder to me. Can everyone please switch their microphone when speaking and then turn it off when finished speaking? I have received apologies from Mr. Coxon. The first item on the agenda is the minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of November 2021. I propose that these minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of November are taken as read and confirmed and signed. Is that agreed by everyone? Yep. There's no dissent to that, so I take that as read. The next is the agreement of the minutes held on the meeting of the 3rd of December 21. I propose that the minutes of the meeting held on the 3rd of December are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Is everybody agreed? Yep. Thank you. Question time. I've received no questions from the public. Questions asked by members under Standing Orders 7.3 and 7.5. I've received no questions from members. Item number 5, to advise any other item which the chairman has decided to take as urgent elsewhere on the agenda. There are no urgent items. Declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda. Do members have any declarations you wish to make? Terry.
I'll just make my usual one, Chairman, as a Lawyers Bank pensioner when we come to the Treasury reports. Okay,
thank you. So, presentation of petitions under Standing Order 35. We received no petitions. The first substantive item on today's agenda is the Resilience and Business Continuity Update set out on pages 15 to 20 of the agenda pack. There will be a presentation for this item which Zafar Salim, Head of Communities Policy and Resilience, will introduce before handing over to Andrew Murr, LLR Prepared and Resilience Partnership Manager, and Mark Warden, Resilience and Business Continuity Manager. So, over to you, Zafar, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Mark, do you want to put up the presentation? Thank you, Mark. Thank you for the introduction. As I said, I'll start off by covering a quick overview of the actual partnership arrangements as a reminder to the committee, and then I'll hand over to Andrew and Mark, who'll then go through some of the more substantive issues that have arisen over the last year. Clearly, obviously the dominant item has been COVID response and recovery, so we'll spend a short amount of time on that. So Mark, if you move on to the next slide. As a reminder, we operate two types of partnerships across the county, both set out as a result of the Civil Contingencies Act 2004. The first one is collectively, there's around 36 partners who are deemed to be Category 1 responders, and these are set out in Civil Contingencies Act, and we operate across the city, county and Rutland. That includes all the districts, Environment Agency, Blue Light, etc. And that's statutorily called the Local Resilience Forum, and that's chaired by the Chief Constable. Beneath that, or parallel to that, there's also local arrangements involving all of the local authorities. So that's again the Rutland County, the city, and the districts. And again, I'll just, if we move on to the next slide, it'll set out some of the duties we undertake. So either at a strategic level across the whole footprint, the LRF, or indeed at an individual partnership level with the districts and the other local authorities, we're obliged to assess risk, threat and risk, put in place various plans that cover the actual emergency, but also the preparation, the planning, the training to support continuity arrangements. There's also a statutory duty around warning and informing the public, primarily so we send out messages such as around severe weather, sort of like weather, flooding, etc., jointly with the Met Office and also with the police and fire and rescue. And then we've got various data protection and GDPR arrangements in place to support local responders, and various arrangements are put in place such as snow wardens and flood water. In addition, what we try and do is not only are we reaching out to the local community, the voluntary sector, the faith sector, etc., we're also trying to work and assist local businesses to adapt as well, because clearly they're major employers, but also they can support us with some of the delivery of some of these plans. So on that, I'll hand over to Andrew, who'll go through some of the challenges around COVID.
Next slide, please, Mark. Thank you. So as Zafar was saying, we are part of the Local Resilience Forum and 16 partner Category 1 responder agencies and some Category 2 responder agencies. Part of my role is as that LRF manager and coordinator. And during the previous 12 months, you can see from the list of incidents there, we've been involved in quite a busy work period, overshadowed, as Zafar was saying, with the COVID-19 response, which has taken up the majority of our time. However, the world doesn't stop spinning, and we've also had to deal with quite a heavy impact from avian influenza, where we've had 5 cases, 4 of which were centred around Walton-on-the-Wolds and Charnwood, and then 1 over near Sheepy Parva in Hinckley and Bosworth. We've had groups and officers set up to deal with asylum quarantine hotels, asylum seeker accommodation, and the Afghan evacuation refugee effort. We've had a major incident ongoing at the Huncote Leisure Centre to do with landfill and built up gases at that site there. We've had a number of high-rise building fires that have had to be responded to by our fire colleagues and evacuations. And a couple of cases of unexploded ordnance. Some of those have been discarded munitions from the Second World War that have been found in gardens. Others have been as a result of magnet fishing, which is a growing trend where they pull stuff out of canals on large magnets. And we've also had to deal with the ongoing severe weather, some of which is linked to climate change, but we're seeing increased incidences of severe weather, flooding, heat, as you would expect and read in the news. Next slide, please, Mark. All of this for the Local Resilience Forum and our offices is overshadowed by the integrated review of security, defence and foreign policy that has started in early 2020, which one of the main things is looking at the whole society approach to resilience, and that may have major implications to our work going forward and how we are structured within the Local Resilience Forum and within the Resilience Partnership. We're waiting for a number of reviews. One is the National Resilience Strategy Review, which is coming out, we hope, in March, linked with the Civil Contingencies Act itself review, also coming out in March. The Civil Contingencies Act has been in place since 2004, so it's a 20-year-old piece of legislation. They're reviewing how that impacts on the Category 1 responders and the whole structure. It may mean, those 2 pieces of act, that we do restructure the Local Resilience Forum. It may mean that there are going to be roles, responsibilities, capacity and capability structures put in place as part of the reporting and what we're expected to do. Political oversight may also be a factor of that. But at the moment, the Local Resilience Forum itself isn't a body in its own right. It's the coordination of our Category 1 and 2 responders. We're expecting as part of those reviews that the LRF will become a legal entity in its own right and subject to everything that implies, such as freedom of information requests. The other point of note there is the LRF funding pilot. We have received funding for the LRFs for the first time as part of the COVID response. We've had notification that this will continue for at least another 3 years. We don't know the size of that funding yet, but that will link into the roles, responsibilities, capability and capacity implications coming in as part of that funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. So what I'll do now is I'll move on to sort of the internal response within Leicestershire County Council and the wider resilience partnership. So since 4th of March 2020, the resilience planning group, which acts as the tactical coordinating group within LCC, has met 182 times. We're still meeting on a weekly basis, and this is chaired by the Assistant Chief Executive. As a result of that, there's been 234 individual actions. I don't propose to go through each of them that's listed there, but the key elements that it covers are staffing, critical sites, critical services, and the PPE and the communications. And one of the actions that it's looked to do most recently is support other LRF partner agencies with staffing. So whether we could redeploy non-critical staff to help support the NHS, and that's something that's ongoing at the moment. The next slide, and I appreciate it, it's a very busy slide and quite small, highlights the LRF structures that have been in place. A lot of these cells have actually been chaired by representatives from Leicestershire County Council. Safar is still chairing the Community, Voluntary and Faith cell, for example. But what I would also highlight is that each of these cells have been supported by a resilience officer from the Resilience Partnership. So that is a case of facilitating meetings and multi-agency working within those groups. Some of these cells are starting to stand down now as we sort of move towards a business as normal approach, but we still do have a strategic coordinating group established. Lessons identified. We have conducted a number of internal Leicestershire and Rutland debriefs, most recently the strategic and tactical coordinating groups. And some of the highlights in terms of lessons identified are increasing the links between Local Resilience Forum and the Health Resilience Forum, clarity on how political stakeholders are connected into SCGs, and the role that elected members can play in supporting communities, engaging with communities during incident response. As Zafar alluded to in his section around data flow and information sharing, it's imperative that we do that so that everybody's aware of what is happening and what the situation is. And something that was picked up at both our internal debriefs, but also by the National Audit Office as well, is longer term horizon scanning and not looking at hazards or potential incidents in isolation. COVID has obviously been going on for 2 years now, and as Andrew's mentioned before, we've had a number of incidents that we've had to respond to, and COVID has provided a bit of an additional challenge onto that around how we respond to those. And the one at the end there, the Dame Mary Nay report. So this was a quick report following the local lockdown in Leicester and sort of Oby and Wigston, is the role of elected members and political engagement. And as Andrew said, now we expect some form of political oversight within the LRF. And I think it's something we can harness and we can use and help to progress resilience, the whole of society preparedness as we go forward. Ongoing work, and this is also some of the work that we've done over the past 2 years as well, is publication of the LLR prepared multi-agency flood plan. And this has been a massive piece of work which has been led by Leicestershire County Council. One of our resilience officers produced that plan. We've re-established the Flood Risk Management Board, and this is already has benefited in the sense that we've now got a multi-agency reporting platform whereby organisations can enter things such as a number of properties flooded within their area, helping us to have that overarching picture of what's going on and looking to respond more effectively. And then we're currently just going through a process of putting together a communications plan so that we've got coordinated communication messages going out. In terms of business continuity, a corporate BC policy has been published and agreed by the corporate management team. We now have business continuity plans in place at both a operational and DMT level, and we're currently starting to look at a corporate business continuity plan, which we hope to have done by the end of March, which pulls all of the key information from those plans into a corporate plan, which we can use to support business continuity issues as they arise. And another one is the cyber incident and disaster recovery work. So historically, business continuity would be focused on things such as loss of staff, loss of buildings, but actually now that we're working towards a hybrid working structure, actually our IT infrastructure is critically important to us. If we lose that now, we would potentially have a massive issue on our hands. So looking at how we can recover that and prepare ourselves against any cyber incidents. Forward look, COVID is still with us. It hasn't gone away. And that's something that we will need to continue to flex and stand down as required. But also actually, we've got the longer term recovery implications about how services can recover, what our new ways of working are, and how we can capitalise on some of the opportunities that it may present. Community engagement is something that we're looking to continue with. Climate change and severe weather. So the wet seasons are becoming wetter and the hot seasons are becoming hotter, and so we need to prepare for that. Again, concurrent incidents. Learning from national inquiries. So we're still currently waiting the final phase of the Grenfell report. The Manchester Arena inquiry is currently ongoing, and we think there'll be a lot of learning there around the role and responsibilities of local authorities and the training and capacity building within those people that respond. As Andrew's mentioned previously, the National Review into Resilience and the independent review of the Civil Contingencies Act and the implications of that for local authorities. And there is a bit of a backlog of BAU. Thankfully, our plans are up to date, but we have been unable really to train and exercise those to the level we would like to have done during COVID. And that sort of leads on into the next point around fatigue and well-being. The team have worked incredibly hard over the past 2 years, as has everybody else. And so when we approach the training and exercising, we need to have a mind on the fact that people have been responding for a long time now. And any incident that may occur will have a further impact on that. And we just need to make sure that we are supporting our staff and the people responsible for responding to an incident appropriately. That's the end of the presentation, and of course we're happy to take any questions, but thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Sapphire, Andrew and Mark, for a comprehensive presentation. There's certainly no lack of challenges. Has anybody got any questions they'd like to ask? Terry.
Thank you, Chair. Very interesting presentation, and I've no doubt all the work's being done. It's really coming back to this point about member involvement and member engagement, and in fact member knowledge. So the Dame Mary Nay report was actually fairly firm that there should be more political engagement across regions and through the LRF. And it's quite then a question of how we achieve that going into some of these things. So if I look at the Flood Risk Management Board, which I think is a great thing to set up, but I, in my division, have an area which floods. I've got Littlethorpe along the River Soar, which gets worse each year. Only in the last week, I've had residents ring me about the possible impact on upstream flooding should the Hinckley National Rail Freight interchange happen. And it's a question of how can we as members tap into information. So I felt I was uniquely unprepared to answer his questions because I had nowhere to go to get the information. So it's a question of what more can we do to provide information and access for members so they can address their residents' concerns.
Would you like me to answer that?
And I was going to say, Andrew, you're probably more familiar with that specific area.
So Leicestershire County Council has a newly formed flood scrutiny panel, which has only been reported to once so far. But the Flood Risk Management Board structure is overseen by that panel, and that will be the political oversight and information spread form for that particular subject.
No, I understand that. It's then how does information disseminate to ordinary members? So if you're not on the board, you're not going to know, are you? So if you've got issues in your division, as I have, how do you actually find the wider work? Because if I understood the thrust of the presentation, because you're now going a horizon scanning, you'll look at possible future events caused by actions being taken today. So how is that information going to be available to members so they can talk to residents within their own divisions about those residents' concerns? It's that linkage. So it's all well and good having a board, but if no one knows what the board are doing or hears any information from it, and I assume it's not a public board, so it's not a public meeting, how do we get that information?
I would have assumed that the board would do reports to the wider council. Sorry, Sophia, you're more knowledgeable.
Yeah, I think what we'll have to do, Mr. Richardson, is we'd have to go back to the chair and say that clearly there's a need for wider public engagement and member engagement, specifically in terms of what their work plan is and, you know, what the issues they're tackling and how that information and confidence can be, information is given to members to give them some confidence to go back to any residents or business or any other stakeholder that comes to them requiring information. So I can't see any reason that unless there is a confidentiality or data protection issue, which I can't imagine there would be, on the face of it, why that would be the case, that the information couldn't be shared. I mean, there may be some sensitivity about partners sharing information, but we could look at that in terms of, sanitized and at least some basic information. We also do respond as a county council and as the flood management, the sort of the lead flooding agency, to any planning proposals and developments or local plans as they're submitted. So we do have some prior knowledge of, say, planning or building or housing or other economic development taking place. But I think it is a fair point that we probably need to go back and pick it up, Andrew, with the officer lead, the senior responsible officer for that particular board, and say there is a member request for greater information to be shared on the workings of that board and any particular issues they're tackling, so that they can better engage and inform and warn the community, which is in line with our statutory duties.
Yes, will do.
Thank you, Terry. A valid point, and I think you're doing all this good work, and it'd be nice to be able to let the public know. Smolter.
Yes, yeah, it's interesting report that, but would it not be pertinent for the report to come back to this committee once a year or something, so we've got some nail to hang things on, or it's just going to disappear anywhere? I mean, I don't know where the report to, if anywhere. But as we're corporate governance, surely it should come here at some time.
Zafar, what would your thoughts on that be?
I'm happy to liaise with Neil and Lauren and then provide. I mean, we're happy to provide as regular reporting as required by the committee, 6 monthly or annually, whichever is easier. Clearly, as Andrew's pointed out, we are expecting significant changes in March, April time, depending on the outcome of these reviews. And it is entirely possible that the Resilience Forum in its current state will move to a more statutory footing, in which case then that may set out, as Mr. Richardson has pointed out, a much clearer and stronger role for elected members in relation to oversight of that forum.
Yeah, I fully appreciate that. Would be good. I think if, as Mr. Bolter said, could we have a report once a year? I mean, I fully appreciate what you're saying. It's likely to be dramatically changed over the next 12 months, but next year, this time next year, if we could have a report, that would be really helpful.
That'd be fine. Yeah, we'll have to pick that up.
Neil.
Sorry to interrupt, Chair. Yeah, sorry. I did recall into the members' training we provided last year, we did a table of the reports that come to committee, and the Resilience and Business Continuity annual report is part of that expectation. Yes. So it's already there, to be fair.
Okay, fine. Good point. Thanks, Neil. Terry.
Just on that point, I appreciate we get a report, and the report shows what instance. What we don't get is we don't know what's happened to the instance. So there's no linkage between what further work is being done by who and who then from a political oversight view, checks that the work has been done, what the timescales are, what the action plans are for that work. And that's, I think, the bit that's missing. I don't know where that goes to. And I sit on the Scrutiny Commission. It doesn't appear to go there. So I'm not sure where it goes to from a political oversight point of view.
So, Zafar, what would you?
Yeah, again, potentially I know Sir Joe's on the call, Joe told me, so perhaps again, myself and Joe and Neil could come back and make a recommendation of how we close that loop, because I think it's important. There is a lot of significant work happening. It does affect everyone within the county. At all levels, so I'd welcome that if there's an opportunity to report into. Obviously, there's an annual report here, but if there's an opportunity to go to a particular scrutiny commission, then happy to do that as well.
Thank you. Thanks. No, that's. I mean, clearly there's a tremendous amount of work going on, good work going on, and oddly, I think it just needs highlighting and bringing to members' attention and the outcome, because there really is an extensive amount of work. It's almost trying to cover any possibility in the future. It's a huge amount of work. Look, thank you. Have we got any other questions? No, we have not. So can I take the report as being noted and that all comments made now will be captured in the minutes in the usual way? I take that as agreed. Yep. Okay, the next item is the Auditor's Annual Report 2020-21 as set out on pages 21 to 62 of the agenda pack. Nick Walsh, Head of Finance, will introduce this item before handing over to Barry Morris from Grant Thornton, who is attending the meeting remotely. So, Nick, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I won't say much, as you said, we've got Barry Morris from Grant Thornton joining us remotely, who'll present the report in detail. But just by way of introduction, this is a new report that replaces the previous annual audit letter, and it includes a more detailed review of the Council's value for money arrangements, involving reviewing large amounts of documentation and discussions with a number of senior officers across the Council. The Auditor's report, I've just lost me. The Auditor's report covers four areas: sort of financial sustainability, governance, improving economy, efficiency and effectiveness, and the opinion of the financial statements. It also reports on the Council's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So overall, the Auditor's assessment is positive, with no significant weaknesses identified. 8 recommendations for improvement were made, as detailed in the report, along with the management responses to each. All of the recommendations have been agreed and will now be implemented. In many areas, the Auditor commented very positively on arrangements of the Council, including reserves management, risk management, partnership working, and performance measurement. So the only thing I'd sort of point out is that I think we have been a little bit of a guinea pig this year in terms of the value for money assessment, because it's not been done in this level of detail right across the country at this stage, but obviously it will be as we move forwards. So that was all I was going to say. So if it's okay, Chair, through you, I'll pass on to Barry to take you through the report.
No, that's fine. Thank you. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I would just echo what's previously been said. This is, in our view, a very positive report and a positive assessment of the Council's arrangements that you have in place across the 3 areas, and then on the financial statements, which obviously we've reported to previously, and in relation to its response to the COVID pandemic. And indeed, when you look at the recommendations that we've made, particularly around improving efficiency, effectiveness and economy, some of what we're saying is replicating what you're doing within departments already at the Council, and just replicating that across other departments as well. So I will take the report as read, so I won't go through it in a huge amount of detail. As has already been said, the recommendations have been accepted. This is a much more thorough review than we've ever done before in response to the new code of practice that's been issued by the National Audit Office. And I do hope that members find the report interesting in both the level of detail that we've gone into, but also provides you with a level of assurance and commentary that you've perhaps not received in previous years around the overall arrangements that the council has for delivering value for money. Chair, happy to pick up any particular questions or any areas of recommendations that members may have.
Thank you, Barry. Yeah, no, I personally thought the report was very good. It gives quite a lot of assurance, taking on board the recommendations, going to act on them. It does go into a huge amount of detail, but I think great credit to our officers for what they have done. Are there any questions or comments? Mr. Bolton.
Thank you. Yes. I normally ask Mr. Jones this question, so I'll keep the standard up. Internal audit. Are you satisfied you've got sufficient resources to carry out the internal audit? Because in the past you take more work on, and a couple of meetings ago you said you lost a couple of officers, you have to be replaced by temporary staff, and I just wondered if you're happy with the level of staff you've got and the amount of support you've got.
Are you happy I answer that, Chair?
Yes, please.
Okay. So there is a specific recommendation around that, and specifically more around counter fraud. Sorry, am I coming through? So I responded back on that to explain the position that when I went through the interview with Grant Thornton, we were at that time still providing to academies. We've stopped that provision now. So immediately a core provision of staff is going to come back into the fold. Since then, we've also had some recruitments back from other posts that were granted to us, and then we're just beginning to put together our apprenticeships posts to come through. So yes, I'm currently satisfied that, especially with bringing back and stopping academies, we will have sufficient resource.
Gotcha. Now, just for the record, that was not to ask that question to make sure it's actually recorded. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Bolton. Is there any other questions or comments on the audit? No? Fine. So can I take the report as being noted and that all the comments now made will be captured in the minutes in the usual way? I take it that is agreed? Yep. Okay, the next item is item 10. We now move on to the external audit progress report and sector update as set out on the pages 63 to 90 of the agenda pack. Again, Nick Walsh will introduce this item before handing over to Barry Morris. So, Nick, over to you.
Thank you again, Chair. Barry obviously will present the report, so only a few points from me. Just to say that the report confirms the 2020-21 Leicestershire County Council and Pension Fund financial statement accounts were approved with an unqualified opinion on the 13th of December 2021, and that's in line with the update provided to the committee on the 3rd of December. It provides a summary of the progress on the key audit deliverables and provides a number of general sector updates for members' information, which in future will be added to the quarterly risk management updates. So through you, Chair, I'll pass over to Barry to take you through the report.
Thanks, Nick.
Sorry, Chair, just trying to find the unmute button there. Thanks again to Nick for introducing this report. So as Nick said, this does just draw to a conclusion the 2020-21 audit. So all of our work has now been completed on both the council and on the pension fund, and the certification of claims and returns has also been completed as well. On page 73, we report the latest outcome from the Financial Reporting Council annual report. This is important because this looks at the overall quality of the work that's being delivered both by our firm, Grant Thornton, and other firms within the sector. And again, it's pleasing to note that actually the investment that the firm has made and indeed paid for by local authorities such as yourself, has started to see those improvements in the overall quality coming through. And again, you'll remember from the presentations on the financial statements, this has involved a significant amount of additional audit work in areas such as the valuation of property, plant and equipment, as well as looking at the COVID arrangements in place to make sure that those are sufficiently robust. So again, that page does demonstrate that improvement. And again, that's also followed on through the quad reviews, which are undertaken on those bodies with turnovers of less than 500 million. On page 75, we just set out the final audit fees for 2021. And you'll see that the final fee that we're proposing is in line with the planned fee that has come to the committee previously. That final fee and the variations from the scale fee is all subject to approval by PSAA and who are the awarding authority, and we will submit those fee variations following this meeting. The rest of the report then is just a sector update. So this provides a number of documents and snapshots of information that may be of interest to members. I don't propose to go through those in any detail, and they are there for information and for you to access further information if you think that would be appropriate. So, Chair, happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Barry. So, has anybody got any questions that they wish to raise? No. Oh no, Terry, it would be. Okay. Oh, Nick, yeah.
Really just a general question. I think all organisations, especially ours, has had to learn through the pandemic about how we do things in trying circumstances and still meet time delays. So what work have you done as a company to ensure that we don't see the delay in accounts being produced we saw last year with the procedures you've adopted to ensure that we don't see such delays? It always worries me when we sign off accounts almost a year after the end of the tax year, or the financial year rather. So what can you do to assure us that you'll meet the timescales this time?
Thank you. Well, interestingly, the timescale in 2020 was set at the 30th of November. Then in this year, it came forward to the 30th of September, and very, very few audits were signed off by that time. So next year is going back to the 30th of November. So with our opinion date that was given, we only just missed that. And again, we were very close to that, and we will be working hard to make sure that we improve that. There's inevitably been an impact as a result of the remote working that we've experienced, and again, as your officers have experienced as well. I think one of the additional complications at the council this year was the implementation of the new financial ledger. So that meant there was additional testing across both of those ledgers, which resulted in a little bit of extra work and some delays in relation to that. So obviously hopefully you won't be implementing another new financial ledger, so that won't be an issue in the current year. And the increased requirements around the work. And as I've said, one of the main contributions to the additional fees is the fact that we're doing more work. Now we've got we use specialist staff in public sector, and there's a finite amount of time that they're available, so there will inevitably be delays. So if there's been delays in completing other audits, then that has a knock-on effect of yours, which is why this our annual auditor's report was slightly delayed. Now we're confident that we can bring that timescale back. As I said, we just missed the 30th of November deadline this year. We should be able to do that next year. And again, that's what our team is working to do. So we will do what we can to make sure that we achieve those deadlines. And there were some unique circumstances this year that meant that we were unable to do so.
Thank you, Barry. Mr. Bannister.
Thank you, Chairman. I was interested in the commentary regarding the file review on value for money, which the indication is of good quality, and only limited improvement is required. No specific recommendations, but what sort of area of limited improvement is needed by the council in respect of any improvement that can be done to achieve even better value for money.
Thank you, Councillor. So that grade, I think you're referring to page 73 there. So that's the assessment of the arrangements that the auditors have in place. So it's not looking at the council's arrangements. So the council's arrangements have been covered in the previous report, in the auditor's annual report. This is the reviews of our files to say whether or not they meet the required standard. So what they're saying is actually where the FRC report it is they include as a grade of 1, which is good with no improvements identified, and also those with a grade 2, which is limited improvements together. So I know that a number of our files scored a level 1, and there were just a couple that had limited improvements, but that's mainly around the quality of the audit documentation to support the work that's been undertaken. So it's not an assessment of the council.
Okay, thank you for the clarity. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. So have we got any other questions? Mr. Bill?
Yes, yes. Thank you, Chairman. Could I mention the elephant in the room? We were able to balance the books across the county and districts for the next year. After that, all the information that's coming out of officials at every level is that we're in dire straits after that, running out of cash, and we just can't see our way forward to supplying the vital services. Has any thought been given to these threats to our future viability? It's not a criticism of the county council, because it applies across the board. County councils up and down the country are in trouble, probably far worse trouble than we are. I know that districts are in a similar state.
Without a doubt, there are
Is
challenges.
anybody giving any thought to this?
Oh, I would be amazed if they weren't. Barry, can I ask you to comment on that?
So I'll give a brief commentary and then hand over to officers who will be able to give the local context. So we do consider the overall arrangements and the medium-term financial planning that you have in place at the council, and that is then reported through in the auditor's annual report. So again, you'll see that we've only made one improvement recommendation there, and again, that isn't about the overall financial sustainability of the council. Indeed, we've commented very positively on the way that the council has managed its finances and has delivered the savings programs that it's got in place. But Councillor, you're right that local government finances and public funding in general is seeing continued pressure, and certainly the low-hanging fruit has long been picked in terms of the savings. And that's why the one recommendation that we made was around the distinction between statutory and discretionary spending, to identify actually of the spend that you are making each year, to what extent is any of that now discretionary, and therefore you have an option to stop, rather than required to be delivered to deliver the statutory services. And again, the question then comes as to the quality of those services that you're being able to deliver. And actually that may see some deterioration in the performance of those services if you have to cut back on some of those areas. So again, the reason that we made that recommendation is to make sure that and we appreciate that it's very difficult to do, and the distinction between where does statutory end and discretionary start is quite a difficult job to do. But that's part of the challenge that I think local government is now facing. So we will continue to make that assessment on an annual basis. So it isn't just looking back at the audit year that's been undertaken, but does take that forward look to the medium-term financial plan and whether or not you are identifying savings to address that budget gap. But as I said, it is our view that the identification and then the delivery of those savings will become increasingly challenging. Chair, I'm not sure if officers would like to come in and provide that context.
Thank you, Barry. I think we're all very, very aware of the challenges we face, but Declan, do you want to comment?
I can give the local context. I mean, Mr. Bill's obviously kind of completely right that it's kind of like a groundhog day that just sort of seems to get worse each year as we kind of overcome sort of the challenges we get, I suppose, a little bit drip fed from sort of government sort of 1 year sort of settlement and sort of short-term measures. But the MTFS, we do try and I suppose make a coherent and credible plan. So although there's sort of challenges ahead, I think the key thing for us as an authority is not to accept that we won't be able to balance the budget, but to keep trying to find ways, whether it's either influencing national government with things like funding reform, or whether it's locally looking for more savings. But Mr. Bill is right; it's a national problem, and it's getting harder every year. So, but the audit regime has changed. If you go back a few years, sort of to the Northamptonshire scenario, although there were audited, there was very little heed paid in some ways to their strategy of how they were managing the books. But we have seen a marked increase in the kind of the level of rigour that Grant Thornton are looking in terms of how we actually go about it. You know, so I've interviewed sort of Neil, Nick, a whole range of officers just about what arrangements are in place to make sure we're making the right decisions for how we manage the money for the long-term sort of sustainability of the authority and the protection of services. So it is tough, but I don't know, we're getting more scrutiny now from the auditors. If that does give some comfort.
Thank you, Declan. Mr. Bill.
Yes, that's helpful, but I mean, could I speak directly to Grant Thornton? I mean, you're presumably the auditors for districts and counties up and down the country. Do you feel that any sense of responsibility that you should now be using your reputation to go to the government and say, look, local government everywhere is in trouble. Can we ask you to look again at what's happening and take action to try to resolve the situation? I mean, it's not just, it's fine to say services are discretionary and statutory, but we're in a situation now where we can see in a year's time, perhaps, is it, that we're not going to be able to pay for the income for statutory responsibilities is not there. And this is going to impact on the lives of everybody who relies on public services for their quality of life. I'm just asking whether you as a national body are making any representation to government to spell out what is actually happening on the ground.
Thanks, Mr. Bill. I'm not totally sure that that's a role that Grant Thornton would undertake. That's more, I thought, for the local government association and people like that. But I really think it's unfair to expect Grant Thornton to approach the government. I may be wrong. Declan, would you like to comment?
I have to admit, I don't know what the reporting arrangements above us in terms of value for money are, whether Barry's got a view about whether anything does get consolidated at sort of that government level for them to make their assessment. But government have started showing a bit more interest in local government. They've continued these monthly returns about a financial position through COVID. My guess will be that now they've started monitoring even more post-COVID, they'll keep something going just to sort of see those kind of like those forward looks on a more regular basis than I've had. But I don't know whether Barry can comment on what happens to value for money above the county level.
Yes, thank you. So it's a really interesting comment. So you're quite right, Chair. The role of the external auditor is limited insofar as we have our statutory responsibilities, and those are to the audited bodies such as the county council in what we're able to do. But members will be aware of a lot of formal audit action that we take in terms of financial management and financial governance, particularly where individual organisations are failing to set balanced budgets or don't have robust financial plans going forward. And you'll have seen that in recent public interest reports that have been issued, which highlight financial concerns as well as governance failings as well. You'll see that there has been an increase in Section 114 notices by directors of finance, and obviously auditors are very closely linked into that and consider the formal audit reporting powers as well. We do liaise regularly with those that are influencers within government, so with SIPFA, with the County Council network, with other societies of treasurers as well, to make sure that our views are being heard as well. And we also sit with DULUC as well to talk to them about our concerns and what we're finding from both the financial statements and the value for money work as well. So again, we are feeding back up the train that goes up into government, but we're not able to make formal representations, I think, as the way the councillor has requested.
Thank you, Barry. Terry.
Yeah, just an observation really, and from what's been said. I don't think the whole of local government's on its knees. I mean, at the end of the last financial year, last time I looked, revenue reserves across local government were 20.7 billion. Most of them held by inner city Labour councils who get massively funded. The issue here is not, you can't do a comparison until you sort out the funding. So until you've got fair funding, you can't do a comparison. And therefore, all we can look at is, I think, the excellent financial management we've had here in the County Council in very difficult circumstances, which is producing a balanced budget and a clear way forward for how we're going to meet any necessary savings. So I accept the point, David, but clearly I think the obligation is on us all as councillors for our own political parties to bang the drum that Leicestershire needs to get that fair crack of the whip. I mean, I was looking at one council up north recently. It's increased its borrowing to 1.1 billion. Because it's spent a fortune on its town centre and is being lauded for it, but you can't actually cover the MRP for the borrowing it's just made. So there is mismanagement in councils, and therefore you've got two things. Councils can only be compared if they got the same base funding level, and then you can actually measure their performance on a comparative basis, which we can't at the moment. So to me, to look at generally nationally is difficult. What we should be concentrating on is locally at Leicestershire County Council. And I think all of us actually should be saying what a brilliant job our officers have done in very trying circumstances as the lowest funded county in the country, which actually gives a blueprint of what others could do if they followed it, which would actually make more money available across the whole of local government, some of which could come to Leicestershire County Council.
Thank you, Terry. I would endorse those comments. I think we are very fortunate. Certainly, as councillors, it's our duty to make sure that the changes that are necessary are implemented. And I certainly don't feel unaware of the challenges going forward. But I do think our officers do an excellent job and are to be commended, given the circumstances. And I think the fairer funding review, I've lost count of the number of times they've promised that coming forward, but Mr. Gove, I believe, has now promised it will come forward when there is no specification, but that may help us. But we have to deal with circumstances that are presented, and I feel very strongly that we are facing it, and we will make the necessary decisions. So, any other comments or questions? No, so we are asked to note the report, and all the comments made will be captured in the usual way. Can I take that as agreed? Agreed. We now move to item 11, risk management update, as set out on pages 91 to 150 of the agenda pack. Neil Jones, Head of Internal Audit and Assurance, will present this item. Over to you, Neil.
Thank you, Chair. So we're beginning on page 91, and this is this report which provides members with updates on the corporate risks, any emerging risks and issues, work on mitigating our fraud risks, and also revisions to the two policies that will support the MTFS papers going forward in February. So my first sort of comment really is on paragraph 5. And it firstly refers to the updates provided on each of the risks on the corporate risk register. They're in Appendix A on pages 99 to 117, and I will of course take any questions on those at the end of the report. When we get there, members will note that I've added, I remember at the last committee, a member asked for the risk scoring methodology to be added there, so they're shown in there as an aid memoir. There's been, since last reported in early November, there hasn't been any specifically new risks added, but 2 descriptions have been amended and they're covered on page 92. Moving on into paragraphs 6 through 8, I provide some information on emerging risks and issues. Firstly, at paragraph 6, a follow-up on what is now less likely to be a risk of major industrial action following trade union ballots over the annual pay award. Then, starting on paragraph 7 is a brief reflection on the potential impacts of inflation increases, both in terms of the cost of living increases and also materials increases. And then also, finally, paragraph 8, and it has been alluded to early on by our business continuity colleagues, it provides some detail on the impact on their involvement in resilience and trading standards in coordinating responses to the bird flu cases in the county. I have checked this morning, and total cases in England is actually higher, and the Leicestershire outbreaks are still listed as disease control zones. Moving on, still in the main cover report, I'll get there in a second. So on to page 94, and this next section of the report, starting at paragraph 9, outlines further work conducted by the Internal Audit Service to mitigate the risk of fraud. The first section is an update on recovering pensions from deceased pensioners and overpayments there, and new controls that have already been implemented and others that are planned. There then follows a section explaining the development of a procurement fraud awareness training video, which is welcomed. And the final section on fraud explains work undertaken to mitigate the ever-increasing risk of mandate fraud, which is widespread in large organisations such as ours, and especially with the move to home working. Moving on, still in the main report, I just going to paragraphs 18 to 20, explain that I've conducted the annual review and revision of the Council's risk management policy and strategy and its insurance policy, and both of these form appendices to the MTFS, which is going to Cabinet and Council in February. So in terms of the insurance policy, the only real change was to reflect higher levels of self-insurance. However, for the risk management policy and strategy, I'd like to just briefly inform members of key changes and decisions taken by chief officers. So can I request that members refer to Appendix B, starting on page 120? And hopefully if we get there. So at the top of page 120, 120 is a whole page that reflects the overall risk environment affecting local authorities. It also refers to the Council's new strategic plan, which may change our risk profile, and a reminder that the policy and strategy needs the member and officer commitment. Moving on, next comment I have is on, I've lost my, It's page 124, and midway down the page here is an important part, instruction for the Council, and chief officers have confirmed that their overall risk appetite remains open, is classed as open, so obviously they would be not risk averse, but very controlling of risk in real critical areas, but very open and needing to, we've talked about value for money, very open in terms of our appetite, in terms of commercial opportunities, etc. Then moving on, I think the next section I wanted to talk about was top of page 128 onwards, and this refers to what we call specialist risk areas. Midway down specialist risk areas. So there have been some updates really to this. It goes through to page 131. So this is where we take account of the corporate risk register comes here, but in the background, obviously, there's a number of areas that are beavering away, conducting their own risk assessments. So we've updated specifically the COVID-19 service response and recovery. We've updated an area on risk financing and insurance. We've updated cyber, and then I've provided a new section on climate change. And then the final part of commentaries on the risk management policy and strategy is, I think, on, I'll get there in a second, page, but it's right at the bottom of the graphs on page, excuse me. I'm having a little bit of trouble in scrolling down my page. Bottom of page 138, and this is important for the committee, and chief officers have confirmed that within the strategy and policy that risk scoring currently above 15 will certainly be debated at chief officer level before being brought to this committee in terms of their oversight. So thank you for that time in explaining a few key areas. Apologies for the hesitance around some of the key chunks, but I'll gladly take any questions.
Thank you, Neil. Have we got any questions? Please, Mr. Bolton.
The question of Arriva seems to be going on forever and a day. 3 years now we've been talking about this and the possible risk to us. Have we got anywhere near a conclusion to this affair? Because on your report today it says it could be a higher impact than you thought because of the city involvement.
Declan will conclude on this that I pushed really hard on this to see whether it still needs to be brought to the register, and it is, because it's almost in its final conclusions, is what I can say. I would hope by the time we get to May that it won't be on the register and all of this will be sorted out, but we really push to get a most up-to-date position and an understanding of the risk in terms of what it meant to this committee.
And the second question, Chair, discussing things sorry with my colleague before the meeting started.
Yeah.
I had a quick look, I couldn't see it. The COVID payments that have been made by the County Council, are they being investigated and checked on at all as a matter of course?
Yes, Chair, sorry. We've not brought an internal audit report to today's meeting, but that would list the areas where we've looked at COVID grants coming in, and also we did some work last year, certainly in terms of payments to suppliers, quite a lot of work around it, sort of thing. Yes, there is still work ongoing. So
yeah, I think it's an area of concern which has been highlighted to the national press at a national level, not only at a local level. I think there are fairly stringent procedures. It's very difficult to be totally watertight, but there are procedures in place. Thanks very much. Thanks, Neil. Terry.
Just a couple, if I may, Chair. Page 105, people. Clearly, we're concerned about absence. I just wonder if an emerging risk that perhaps is linked with that is that are we measuring the productivity levels of people working from home? Because there's two risks. People might be off sick, but they might be producing less. Now, I'm not accusing the people of deliberately producing less, but circumstances in a home environment may preclude them from being as effective as if they were in the office. So I would see that as a dual risk there of, you know, as we move to more agile working, as all councils will, I'm sure, is there a risk that if productivity levels are not monitored effectively, that could have as big or larger impact than absences, if that makes point. And perhaps should that be expanded, that risk? I throw it out as a thought because it does seem to be one of those things that's coming forward. And anecdotally, a lot of staff are now actually saying, you know, not just here but across workforces, that they prefer to be in the office because they can concentrate on things easier.
Yeah, I can certainly concur with Mr. Richardson's concerns really over the productivity element, because in all of my research around these risks, that is mentioned as it could be a failing. I'm not, I mean, as a manager myself, you know, I'm reasonably comfortable with the throughput of work from my staff. I'm not sure if anything corporately is.
I mean, it is one of those difficult areas, but you're obviously quite right to highlight it. I know as part of the Ways of Working programme that's kind of mixture of sort of, you know, what do we do with sort of the campus? How do we sort of get extra money? And it was falling under that remit about kind of productivity. But I think it's a good call. We'll go back and talk to them about sort of, is there something that's worth escalating up, or is there any assurance that they can give around that kind of, you know, what's the path forward to improving that? Because it is a new emerging area, and I think most organisations, public, private sector, are kind of grappling with this one.
Yeah, thanks for that, because I think it also, sorry if I may.
Yeah, of course.
Thanks for that, because I think it also links into what you've got there quite correctly, is early identification of any staff welfare issues, which have got to be our prime concern. I mean, the welfare of our staff should be top of the list, so I'm pleased with that. And then my second question is what you just covered, Neil, on page 138, about whether there is a risk score of 15, must be escalated to chief officers. And it comes back to corporate governance, which is, after all, we're a corporate governance committee, so we look at the ones effectively over 15. But who does the corporate governance to ensure that ones aren't, I won't say wrongly assessed, but how do we get assurance that the correct assessment has been made so that it's seen by this committee? So what member oversight is there on those reports on whether or not it's below or above 15? So who signs that off from a member perspective, from a scrutiny corporate governance perspective? And if it's just one member, is that wide enough, particularly if it's a member of the executive?
Today's report covering the framework explains how it starts from the bottom up, and then members of my team, my audit team, go to each department and effectively challenge on a particular basis their risk registers, and the areas they're challenging are: is it the right score? Are you treating it correctly in terms of the framework? Have you taken account of this? So, you know, that there is an element of challenge and assurance provided there, and then it's brought to me for an oversight, and that what brings forward into the corporate risk register. There isn't a I mean, arguably we could we don't take that to lead member, do we, for resource? Yeah.
I think it's fair respite.
Yeah. We did. I think I remember, Mr. Richards, you did ask a similar question. We did do a sort of quick trawl of who did take their departmental registers to their lead member. I could feed back on that.
I think that's my point is, if we got consistency of corporate governance, because one of the things we should have is, you know, if one area does it, all areas should do it, or no area should do it. But I would have thought perhaps another thing is that perhaps this committee could just see a short list of those that were perhaps, I don't know, 13 to 15, and the decision that was made, either they'll be in here or they won't have been in here, and perhaps that gives a separate assurance that, you know, we're supporting our officers in the decisions they've probably quite correctly made. I doubt if we'll change any, but I'm just worried about that member oversight, not political. What is political oversight? Because we should be there for the protection of officers, because ultimately it should be our decision.
Thank you. Thanks.
Chair, just before you move to the recommendations, we always try to look forward to the next committee and for a presentation to the next committee, which is in May. And I did some research, and I think that the governance arrangements around the Freeport would be available for a presentation and debate amongst the committee. But if there's a hold-up, we thought that a sort of worldwide risk at the moment is the risk of what's known as the Great Resignation, and it's all around the councils. That would be around the council's approach to mitigate the risk around retaining our workforce, and if we can't retain them, recruiting where we need to. So that would be a backup if we didn't have the Freeport.
That's great. Is that agreeable to members? A report on the Freeport? I think that'd be quite interesting. In failing that, the retention of staff and recruitment, and that would be fine. So if we have no other questions, so we're asked to recommend, moving to recommendation, which are set out on page 96 of the agenda pack. The committee is asked to approve the current status of the strategic risks facing the County Council. I'll have to move this recommendation. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Terry. Can I take it as agreed if there's no dissent? Thank you. That's lovely. So we've dealt with the presentations. With regard to recommendation C, can I take these updates as being duly noted? Okay, take that as agreed. We now move on to item 12 regarding the Regulation Investigatory Power Act 2000 and Investigatory Powers Act 2016, as set out on pages 151 to 158 of the agenda pack. Gary Connors, Head of Regulatory Services, will present the item. Over to you, Gary.
Good morning.
Morning, Gary.
The video doesn't seem to be working. Let me just see if I can resolve that. Unfortunately, it doesn't appear to be working, but I'll continue and hope that you can hear me okay. That's fine.
We can hear you, Gary.
Okay, that's fine. Right, just in terms of the report then, as indicated on paragraph 2 of the report, the local authority is required to set a policy which outlines how it intends to comply with RIPA and the Investigatory Powers Act 2016, and it's to ensure that any surveillance activity undertaken by the local authority is lawful, necessary and proportionate. And the policy should also ensure that all employees have an overall awareness of what would be deemed as covert surveillance, and that managers, if contemplating any such activity, are aware that an authorisation process exists. Paragraph 14 outlines really what we're talking about with surveillance in a local authority context, and it's down really to 3 types. One is in relation to directed surveillance, which is covert observations. Covert human intelligence sources is quite frankly a fancy word in a local authority context, mainly to do with covert test purchasing. And communications data. The important issue here is that allows us to access mobile phone subscriber details, for example, internet protocols, but not the content of a communication. It is important to stress that local authorities may only deploy surveillance for the purposes of preventing and detecting crime. And with directed surveillance and certain types of communications data, there must be alleged criminality, and it must be of a serious nature. There is a 2-layer authorization process that ensures that necessity and proportionality principles are considered in all circumstances whereby surveillance is contemplated. The first layer involves a written application to undertake the surveillance activity, which is then considered by a senior nominated authorising officer within the county council. But the second layer, for within the 12 months, the level of activity, as you can see, is relatively low, and all of that has emanated from trading standards investigations. Surveillance is obviously resource intensive, and some of our trading standards activities, which use surveillance activities, have been reduced to deal with other demands around product safety, scams, and clearly the coronavirus circumstances. The current covert surveillance policy that appears in the appendix there to the report remains fit for purpose, and therefore it can remain here with corporate governance with no.
Of the importance of RIPA as a useful tool to gather information and evidence to inform criminal investigations. I was just wondering, in respect of the 6 applications or authorizations that were approved, referred to in paragraph 14 of the report, how many actually did lead to successful prosecutions? Thank you.
Yes, the current situation is that 4 of those 6 have resulted in criminal proceedings. There are 2 that are outstanding currently. The latest is in relation to a seizure of a large quantity of counterfeit and unsafe products, and we are at the process of interview stage, and that will progress through. So I envisage that in this case, all 6 will result in prosecution or some form of legal process.
Thank you, and that just adds to the necessity of the use of RIPA.
Absolutely, yeah.
So
it's quite a difficult balance with local authorities, because I think local authorities, unlike many other enforcement agencies, are possibly open to greater scrutiny in the use of these covert techniques.
Thank you very much, Gary.
Thank you, Gary. I think that gives us quite a lot of reassurance. Terry.
Thanks, Gary. Completely happy with the framework and everything you've got here. It was just really a general question from your experience. Do you believe that the powers as they stand enable us as an authority to do what we need to do, or do you believe the restrictions of RIPA and Investor Powers Act and how we apply for them actually put such a burden on us we probably don't do as many as we should? I mean, it always struck me when the law was changed that it was more in favour of the perpetrator rather than us as trying to actually seek out wrongdoing and change it. So are you comfortable that you can apply whenever you need to and it's not over onerous? And does it stop us applying in certain circumstances when, if the restrictions weren't as great, you might otherwise do so?
No, I think generally, I'd be satisfied operationally that the powers are adequate. I will say one thing, and that is in relation to the approach by different local authorities. We've never been afraid of using the process, but the fact that it involves judicial approval, let me suggest that some authorities would perhaps be a little bit more cautious. We're not. Where we think it's appropriate for the proper and effective conduct of the investigation, we'll utilise that judicial application process and apply for surveillance. And in those circumstances, we've never really yet been refused by the courts. We put up a reasoned case, and I think because local authorities are subject to perhaps a little bit more criticism on the use of those powers. We've all probably several years ago now, but when RIPA came into place, it was all about local authorities suggesting that cameras were going into wheelie bins and people were being monitored to see that they live within a catchment area of a school, for example. But I think those days are gone now. So I think it's it's an adequate system for us. A second point I'd make is that this is about covert. Obtaining information covertly. When we execute warrants, for example, in the recent case I've just mentioned with counterfeit products, we will seize PCs and other electronic devices, and that is not covert. So we can get access to things like contents of communications data where it's relevant to the investigation. So in answer to your question, I think that it's adequate for local authorities.
Thanks, Gary. No other questions? No. So moving to recommendations set out on page 153 to 154. Regarding the first recommendation, the committee is asked to note the use of the regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000 and the Investigatory Powers Act 2016 for the period 1st of January to 31st December 2021. Can I take it as noted? Yeah. The second recommendation asks the committee to review the attached covert surveillance and the acquisition of communication data policy statement, which is unchanged since the approval by Cabinet in March 21, and confirm that this remains fit for purpose. I'm happy to move this recommendation. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Terry. All those in favour? Yep. So that is agreed. With regard to the final recommendation, the committee is asked to agree to continue to receive an annual report on the use of RIPA and the Investigatory Powers Authority, IPA powers. I'm happy to move this recommendation. Can I have a seconder? All those in favour? Thank you. So I take that's agreed. The next item is the Treasury Management Strategy Statement and Annual Investment Statement as set out on pages 159 to 186 of the agenda pack. So I'm going to ask Nick to present this item. So Nick, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. This report informs the committee of the updated version of the Treasury Management and Annual Investment Strategy for 2022-23. It's one of a number of strategies that form part of the overall medium-term financial strategy that will be approved by County Council on the 17th of February. The background section of the report lays out how the Treasury management and investment strategy relates to these other strategies. And perhaps the key issue for this committee is to be assured that the Council has appropriate governance in place to adhere to SITFA's Treasury Management Code of Practice and Revised Prudential Code and related guidance from the Secretary of State. In particular, its approach to investments outside of normal Treasury management activity, which is managed through the Corporate Asset Investment Fund and its associated strategy, which has been considered by Scrutiny Committee and then will be then considered further by Cabinet at its meeting next week. Taking account of comments received from Scrutiny Commission, of course, it's key to note that obviously no borrowing has been undertaken for corporate and asset investment fund investments, and of course there are no plans to do so. So moving on to the section starting at paragraph 10, members will be aware from the quarterly Treasury management reports that short-term investment options continue to be limited, and demand in financial institutions for capital continues to be limited. To continue to reduce the risk of money sitting in low interest accounts with nowhere to invest it, or in low interest money market funds, paragraph 11 lays out the plans to increase the limits for single countries from 30 million to 50 million. So just to be clear, this won't impact on the limits for an individual institution, but does increase the amount we could have invested with, for example, Canadian banks in total at any one point in time. And because things can move very quickly in the financial markets, paragraph 12 just refers to exceptional circumstances where the Director of Corporate Resources may be required to take action which might breach these limits. And as noted in the meeting of this committee this time last year, this will only happen as a last resort and preferably in consultation with the chairman of this committee. And when it does happen, it will be reported back to the committee at the first opportunity. Apart from the change referred to previously, no other changes to the strategy are proposed, so I won't go through it in detail. But just to point out a few things, paragraph 7 of the appendix reflects the current Treasury portfolio position as at the end of December. £263 million of the borrowing offset by £357 million of investments. And the detail of those investments are covered in the next report. Paragraph 8 shows that the Council is forecast to be over borrowed by 37 million at the end of this financial year. But that going forwards, the MTFS requires an increased capital financing requirement of the £143 million. And at this point, I will just point out that that £143 should be been repeated on paragraph 22 of the appendix. On page 170, it states 161 million there, but so I say that should read 143 million to be consistent with what's in paragraph 8. So that figure is wrong, but it will be updated in the version going to the Cabinet. So 143 million is the right figure. But of course, due to the buoyant internal cash balances, it is not expected at this stage that any new external loans will need to be undertaken to fund the capital programme as it's laid out at the moment. However, by the end of the MTFS, the over-borrowed 37 million position will have moved to an under-borrowed position of 84 million. That's our expectation at present. Paragraph 10 shows that capital financing costs hitting the revenue account are expected to grow from £19.5 million in 22-23 to £22.5 million in 25-6. And it's worth noting that there will be an additional impact on Treasury management returns as cash balances will be lower. Well, obviously, while interest rates are low, the impact of that won't be that significant. And as the table in paragraph 13 of the appendix shows, they are forecast to rise during the life of the MTFS, but perhaps not to any significant degree, maybe up by 1%. That was all I was going to say, Chair, for now, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Nick. Has anybody got any questions or queries on this report? There's not. Can I take the report as noted and that all comments made will be captured in the minutes? I'll take this as agreed. Yep, everybody agreed. So we now move to the final item on today's agenda, which is a quarterly Treasury Management Report, as set on page 187 to 196 of the agenda pack. Again, Nick, can I ask you to present this?
Yep, thank you, Chair. This report comments on the position up to and including the third quarter of the 2021-22 financial year. The section starting at paragraph 6 summarises the key economic factors relevant to our financial position. There's more detail of those in the appendix, and the appendix is the quarterly economic outlook produced by our Treasury Management Advisors, Link Asset Management. As you will be aware, interest rates were raised from 0.1% to 0.25% in December, perhaps a month later than markets were expecting. But given the ever-increasing threat of inflation, some forecasters now suggesting it may peak at 7% later in this current year before settling back down to more reasonable levels. The markets are pricing in further interest rate rises through the year, potentially reaching 1% by the end of 2022. However, more recent economic indicators, notably the disappointing 0.1% rise in GDP in October, suggested that the economy was already slowing down, and that's before the impact of Omicron. So this balance between putting a lid on inflation but not suppressing economic growth will be what the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee will be grappling with in the coming months. Actually, moving on to the next section, starting at paragraph 10, the report notes that £212 million worth of investment loans matured during the period at an average rate of 0.15%, and 192 million of new loans were placed at an average of 0.3%. That leaves the overall portfolio at nearly 357 million, which is broken down in the table in paragraph 14. Further 1.3 million of private debt investment was received back during the quarter. This means that 8.8 million in total has been returned from the original investment of 20 million, leaving 11.2 million invested. That remaining investment currently has a market value of 11.5 million. But in addition to the returned capital, 2.7 million has now been received in interest, representing a rate of return of 4.6%. And it's worth pointing out that without the private debt, the portfolio would be showing an average rate of return of 0.24%. With it, it's 0.47%. And then finally, paragraph 16 now reports that the first call of 8 million from the 20 million committed to the latest partners private debt fund, agreed by Cabinet on the 19th of November last year, was paid in December 21. And also at that point, we were required to pay 147,000 in interest true-up payments, which were made in line with what was expected and built into the investment appraisal. What this does is it compensates existing investors in the fund for the fact that they have had their capital tied up in the fund for longer. So that was all I was intending to say, Chair.
Thank you, Nick, for that presentation. Has any member got any questions? Neil.
Yes, thank you. In these reports, I always find the economic overview, which has been provided by Link Asset Services, really quite interesting, having a look at the sort of economic situation, not just nationally, but internationally as well. And I did note earlier this week, there'd been, I think, quite a large stock market fall and currency fluctuations as well, which followed quite a bit of a rhetoric in respect of what would happen if there was a war in the Ukraine. And the implications appear to be that it could have quite a global economic impact if indeed, God forbid, there was Russian invasion in Ukraine and the subsequent economic sanctions that took place. Having regard to that risk, would you consider that there is going to be an impact on the county council's investments should war actually take place?
It's an easy question for you, Nick.
Yeah, it is back to that crystal ball a little bit, isn't it? I think it will inevitably have an impact in terms of the wider financial markets, but the scale of that impact and then how much of that scale of it translates back into what it means in terms of our own treasury management position is obviously very, very difficult to predict. But all we can do is obviously we're always watching the latest indicators. You know, we always take our updated information from Link Asset Management, and that, you know, that will be updated on a regular basis. So we will just need to be, you know, very, very, very vigilant and making sure we're taking appropriate action, you know, to whatever information becomes available at any point in time. But I'm not sure that there's anything specifically we can do now to try and sort of reduce the risks of anything happening on the back of it. That's probably all I can say, really.
Thank you, Neil. Yeah, no, I think there'd be massive impact if there was a war in the Ukraine. I think worldwide, just be disastrous, absolutely disastrous. Right, so that if we have no other questions, the committee is asked to note the report. Is everybody happy to do that? Thank you very much. The date of the next meeting is to be held on the 13th of May this year at 10 o'clock. So the final item, any other items which the chair has decided to take as urgent. There are no other items. So thank you for attending today's meeting, and now declare the meeting closed.